The sun is dropping behind the Judean hills, and the temperature is falling rapidly with it. In the ancient Near East, the climate is merciless. The text presents a scenario where a poor man has given his cloak to a wealthy neighbor as a pledge for a loan. To understand the depth of what is actually being handed across that doorway, we have to examine the ancient words used for the pledge. The transaction at the doorway is quiet. A folded piece of cloth is handed across the threshold. To a modern observer, it looks like a simple exchange of goods. But the ancient language used to describe this moment carries a heavy, almost violent weight. Look closely at the object being handed over. The Hebrew word is salma. Standard English Bibles translate this simply as cloak or garment. The translation is accurate, but the English word is far narrower than the ancient reality. For a modern reader, a cloak is merely an accessory. It is a piece of clothing you hang in a closet, easily replaced by another. In the ancient Near East, the salma was completely different. It was a large, heavy, tightly woven square of wool. It was not just worn, it was actively utilized for survival. For a poor farmer, this garment functioned as a portable shelter. During the day, it blocked the scorching sun. When he traveled, he folded it to carry his supplies. If a sudden rainstorm swept across the hills, it became a makeshift tent for his children. And at night, it was his only bed and blanket. The salma was the physical boundary between a man's fragile body and a hostile environment. Under any normal legal system, the creditor holds the collateral until the debt is paid in full. The leverage works precisely because the debtor feels the pain. Now consider what happens to it. The debtor gives the garment as a pledge. The Hebrew noun used here is kabol. Again, the English translation, pledge or collateral, sounds like a sterile, neutral banking term. It sounds like signing a clean paper contract, but the original audience would have heard a far more dangerous concept. The noun chabol is derived from the root verb chabal. This verb can mean to bind or to take as a pledge, but it's primary. Most frequent use in the Hebrew Bible is entirely different. Chabal means to ruin, to destroy, or to corrupt. It is the exact same word used elsewhere in Scripture to describe a land being laid waste, or a fragile vineyard being destroyed by wild animals. Why would the ancient language use the exact same root word for a financial pledge and physical destruction? Because the ancient mind understood what modern finance tries to hide. Debt is a form of binding, and when unregulated power takes collateral from the vulnerable, it inherently crosses the line into ruin. When a creditor takes a poor man's salma as a chabol, he is not merely holding a financial asset, he is holding the man's basic right to exist. To permanently strip a man of his salma was to socially and physically destroy him. This changes how we read the ancient law. God is not simply managing an agricultural economy. He is aggressively preventing the ruin of the poor, of its absence. It forces compliance. But in Exodus chapter 22, God inserts a jarring, self-defeating clause into the financial code. By forcing the creditor to return the heavy wool before the cold night sets in, God forces the rich man to release his binding power every single day. The debtor must be allowed to survive the darkness with his dignity intact. God established these beautiful, intricate boundaries to protect the vulnerable. The cloak must return. The millstone remains untouched. The doorway is impassable. But what happens when an entire society decides that wealth is more important than dignity? What happens when those in power decide these ancient rules are no longer convenient? Centuries later, the same physical objects reappear in Scripture. But this time, the prophets look at Israel and see a terrifying, systemic violation of this very law. Section 6. The prophet's indictment. The scene changes. Centuries have passed. Israel is no longer a collection of wandering tribes relying on daily manna in the wilderness. It is a prosperous, established kingdom. The markets are full. The borders are secure. And the religious festivals are heavily attended. Smoke from burning incense rises in the sanctuary. The sound of chanted prayers echoes off the stone walls. From the outside, the nation looks perfectly faithful, financially secure. and spiritually alive. But a shepherd named Amos walks into this wealthy society and delivers a devastating message. He does not attack their formal theology. He points directly at the floor of their sanctuaries. In Amos chapter 2, God pronounces judgment on Israel. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. Read that carefully. For a specific, calculated sin, they lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. Stop and look at that cinematic image. Remember the salma, the heavy woolen cloak we examined earlier. Remember the strict boundary God drew in the desert, demanding that the pledge be returned before the sun went down, so the vulnerable debtor would not freeze in the dark. Now, look at what the wealthy elites are actually doing. They are intentionally ignoring the boundary line. The sun has gone down. The evening air is turning bitter, and somewhere in the city, a poor man is shivering in the dark, stripped of his dignity. But the creditor does not care. He is keeping the leverage. He has taken the chabal, the pledge, and allowed it to become actual ruin, just as the ancient language warned. But the horror of the prophetic text goes even deeper. The rich are not merely hoarding these garments in locked storehouses to secure a financial return. They are bringing the stolen cloaks into the temple. They are using them as comfortable cushions to recline on while they offer sacrifices and worship God. This is the ultimate spiritual hypocrisy. In Exodus, God had explicitly warned, "If he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate." But the elites lounging beside the altar are completely deaf to those cries. They have deafened themselves with the sound of their own worship. The law legally authorizes the creditor to take the pledge, but then demands he surrender it every single night. They have stripped the vulnerable of their shelter, and then taken the physical evidence of their economic oppression and spread it out before the altar. They are attempting to worship the God of the oppressed while sitting comfortably on the ruin of the poor. God completely rejects this. The prophets make it terrifyingly clear that God does not accept religious devotion built on top of human exploitation. You cannot pray to the God of Israel while crushing the people he specifically swore to protect. When the boundaries of power are ignored, when the humanity of the poor is treated as a disposable commodity, the religious ritual becomes an absolute abomination. It is easy to look back at these ancient creditors and judge their cruelty. It is comfortable to stand at a safe historical distance and condemn the elites of Amos's day for holding on to the cloak, keeping the millstone, and crossing the threshold. But this ancient indictment refuses to stay locked in the past. It echoes down through the centuries, demanding a response from us today. Because the question is not just whether ancient lenders gave back a physical woolen garment. The question is, who holds the power now? And this is where the ancient laws of collateral suddenly become intensely personal. The ancient indictment of Amos forces a mirror in front of us. You likely do not own a heavy woolen garment taken from a poor farmer. The text even provides God's own reasoning for this strange command. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. You are probably not holding a basalt millstone hostage in your living room. Because our economic systems have changed so dramatically, it is incredibly easy to assume these commands no longer apply to us. But human nature has not changed. We still know exactly how to extract a pledge. We still understand leverage. Leverage is the power you possess when someone owes you. It is the subtle, intoxicating control you feel when you are in the right and another person is in the wrong. Sometimes, that debt is literal and financial. Perhaps a friend, an employee, or a family member borrowed money from you because you hold that debt. Do you suddenly feel entitled to casually criticize their life choices, crossing the invisible threshold of their privacy because you are the creditor? Do you use their financial obligation to make them feel small? More often, the debt we hold is emotional and relational. Someone has wronged you. They failed you, broke a promise, or spoke carelessly. They owe you an apology. You have the moral high ground. You hold the legal right to exact a penalty. How do you handle that leverage? When they offer an apology, do you accept it gracefully at the door? Or do you force your way inside their psychological home, verbally humiliating them? making sure they feel the full weight of their failure? In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. The problem is not that the verse is unclear. Do you take their dignity as collateral, holding them out in the cold until your own anger feels adequately satisfied? Do you casually share their failure with others, effectively taking their upper millstone, their reputation and ability to stand back up, just to secure your own sense of justice? We hold on to the cloak because holding leverage feels safe. When we keep someone indebted to us, when we remind them of what they owe, we remain in control. But the biblical standard violently confronts our desire for control. God's law does not say that debts are irrelevant. The ancient law allowed the pledge to be taken during the heat of the day. God does not demand that we pretend wrongs never happened or that debts do not exist. But he asks a terrifying question of anyone who holds power over another. When you have the absolute legal, financial, or moral right to crush someone, what do you choose? Do you maximize your own leverage, or do you protect their humanity? This is not ultimately a story about an ancient agrarian society. It is a story about how you treat the vulnerable people in your own life. Look closely at your relationships. Are you holding on to someone's cloak after the sun has gone down? Are you forcing a debtor to freeze in the dark? The problem is that it fundamentally contradicts the entire mechanism of collateral. If a powerful creditor must give the pledge back exactly when the vulnerable debtor, because you refuse to surrender your advantage, the command of God is clear. Step back. Stand in the dust outside the door. Release the leverage. Let the shivering debtor have their warmth. This is a massive moral demand. It requires surrendering the very power we feel entirely entitled to keep. It goes against every human instinct of self-preservation and justice. But there is one final layer to this ancient imagery of the stripped garment and the unpayable debt. To see the final picture, we must look away from the ancient Near East, leave the prophets behind, and turn toward a hill outside Jerusalem, outside the walls of Jerusalem. A different kind of darkness is falling. It is the middle of the day, but the sky has suddenly turned black. A man is hanging on a Roman cross, struggling for breath. For the entirety of this investigation, we have watched God draw absolute boundary lines to protect the vulnerable. We saw the invisible threshold that could not be crossed. We saw the heavy millstone that could not be taken. We saw the heavy woolen cloak that had to be returned before sunset. We assumed these were simply ancient financial regulations. Instead, they were a precise revelation of the character of God. They revealed a king who refuses to use ultimate power to crush the weak, needs it most when the sun goes down and the desert cold sets in. How does this economic system actually function? But when you look at the cross, the ancient pattern is stunningly reversed. Jesus of Nazareth does not hang there as the wealthy creditor. He hangs there as the desperate debtor. He has willingly taken upon himself the staggering, unpayable moral debt of the entire human race. And the physical details of his execution are not a coincidence. Before nailing him to the wood, the Roman soldiers strip him of his outer garments. The Gospel accounts specifically record that they divide his clothing, leaving him completely exposed to the elements. The Creator of the universe, the very God who fiercely commanded that no poor man should ever be left without his covering in the cold night, is now stripped naked. He allowed the threshold of his own physical dignity to be violently crossed. He allowed the millstone of his own body to be crushed. He is left to bleed and suffocate in the chill of the Judean air. He became the shivering man in the dark. Why would he endure this? Because our spiritual debt was absolute. Under the strict laws of ultimate justice, God held every ounce of leverage. He had the total moral right to cross our threshold, inspect our ruin, seize our lives as collateral, and leave us in the outer darkness. The debt was real. The ruin, the devastating reality of the chabal, was entirely earned. But here is the central contrast of the gospel. Why legally authorize the lender to take the cloak during the heat of the day, only to force him to hand it back every single evening? This is not ultimately a story about a God who demands repayment at the expense of our humanity. It is a story about a God who absorbs the cost himself, Instead of using his leverage to destroy us, God surrendered his leverage to save us. He allowed himself to be stripped so that we could be clothed. He allowed his own life to be taken in pledge, so that our permanent freedom could be secured. He paid the debt he did not owe, so that we, the ruined debtors, could be safely restored to the household. When you truly comprehend what happened on that hill, it shatters your desire for control. When you realize that the sovereign God refused to hold your massive debt against you, how can you possibly hold on to someone else's cloak? You cannot look at the exposed, wounded body of Christ and continue demanding absolute leverage over your neighbor. We began this journey looking at a desperate man standing in the cold desert night, wondering if a powerful creditor would ever return his only source of warmth. The chill of this world is still real. People will still fail you. Debts will still accrue, and you will still face seasons of deep vulnerability. But you are no longer the one standing defenseless in the dark. The ultimate creditor has stepped down into the cold in your place. The blistering, dusty heat of the afternoon quickly gives way to a bitter, bone-chilling night. A man stands outside his shelter, shivering in the gathering dark. If the creditor is stripped of his leverage every night, what is the point of the pledge? This is the central question. The unpayable debt is canceled. The binding leverage of your past is permanently broken. The sun has gone down, but your garment has been returned. Why did God put such highly specific, seemingly illogical limits on what a lender could hold? The answer reveals something profound. This is not ultimately a story about ancient finance or agrarian economics. It is a story about the boundaries of human power. Through the symbol of a simple woolen cloak, God is establishing a hard line that neither wealth, nor leverage, nor legal right is allowed to cross. He is declaring that human dignity cannot be owned by a creditor. But to understand how revolutionary this nightly return of the cloak truly was, we must first step away from our modern banking systems. We have to enter a world where unpaid debt did not just mean a lowered credit score, but something far more terrifying. The ancient Near East was a landscape of precarious survival. Unlike the great empires of Egypt or Mesopotamia, which relied on the predictable, massive river systems of the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates, the land of Canaan depended entirely on seasonal rain. When the rain fell, the land produced barley, wheat, and oil. But if the autumn rains arrived late, or the spring rains failed to fall, he is deeply in debt. He has borrowed grain just to keep his family alive through a failing harvest. The earth turned to iron. A single drought did not just mean a difficult economic year. It meant the clay storage jars sat empty. It meant the physical threat of starvation. When a harvest failed, an ancient farmer had only one option to keep his family alive. He had to borrow. He borrowed grain to eat, and he borrowed seed to plant for the coming year, desperately hoping the rains would return. But this borrowing placed him at the absolute mercy of wealthy elites and landowners who held surplus supplies. The ancient economic system was brutal. Across the surrounding empires of the ancient world, lenders held unquestioned power. In this reality, if you defaulted on a loan, you did not simply lose your financial standing. You lost your freedom. When a poor farmer could not repay what he owed, the creditor would first seize his ancestral land. If the debt was still not covered, the creditor would take the farmer's sons and daughters as debt slaves to work off the balance. If that was not enough, the man himself would be taken, his household would be dissolved, his inheritance erased, and his freedom extinguished. Unpaid debt absorbed you entirely into the household of the rich. The lender literally owned your future. This is the terrifying world into which God speaks the laws of Israel. To secure that life-saving loan, he has handed over the only physical item of value he still possesses, his large, heavy woolen outer garment, his cloak. The surrounding nations allowed a creditor to squeeze a vulnerable debtor until there was nothing left to extract. But the law of Moses steps directly into the economic transaction and draws an invisible, unbreakable boundary. God says, in effect, you may lend, and you may take a pledge to secure your loan. But you do not own this man. He belongs to me. This is why the daily return of the cloak was so disruptive. It was a rhythmic, physical reminder of the limits of wealth. By forcing the creditor to hand back the collateral at sunset, God was violently interrupting the machinery of debt. The creditor was legally barred from utilizing his financial leverage to freeze the poor man in the night. The law protected the debtor's dignity, ensuring he did not have to beg for his own survival every evening. Poverty did not strip him of his humanity. The return of the cloak protected a man's life in the dark. That would already be significant. But the story does not end there. God's boundary lines extend beyond the chill of the desert evening. He moves to protect not just a man's shelter, but his very ability to survive the morning. And the next restriction centers on a heavy, physical object that meant the difference between eating and starving. Most of us are highly familiar with the concept of collateral. In modern finance, if you fail to repay a loan, before the sun rises over an ancient Israelite village, a distinct sound breaks the silence. It is the rhythmic, heavy scrape of basalt grinding against basalt. Inside a small stone dwelling, a woman kneels on the hard floor, turning a heavy stone over a stationary base. She is crushing wheat or barley into flour to bake the daily bread. In the ancient world, bread was not a side dish. It was the primary source of caloric survival. Without flour, a family does not eat. Without the millstone, there is no flour. A household hand mill consisted of two essential parts: a heavy, stationary lower stone, and a smaller, movable upper stone, sometimes called the rider. Grinding grain was physically exhausting. Daily work. Flour could not be stored for long periods without spoiling or attracting pests, meaning the stones had to turn every single morning. The hand mill was the beating heart of the family's survival. Now, imagine a powerful creditor arrives at the home of a debtor. He wants collateral for a loan. The creditor's eyes fall on the hand mill. It is a highly valuable, indispensable tool. Taking it would create the ultimate leverage. A man whose children are hungry will do whatever it takes, and pay whatever interest is demanded, to get his millstone back. But once again, the biblical text violently interrupts the mechanism of leverage. The bank keeps your house, your vehicle, or your financial assets. The leverage belongs entirely to the lender. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, a second strict boundary is drawn. No one shall take a hand mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. Notice the precise wording. The law forbids taking the entire hand mill, but it explicitly forbids taking even the upper millstone. A clever creditor might argue, I am not taking his entire machine. I am only taking a single piece of it as collateral. He can keep the base. But without the upper stone, the lower stone is merely a useless rock. Taking just the upper half is a calculated act of control. It allows the creditor to easily transport the leverage under his arm, while completely disabling the poor man's ability to feed himself. The biblical text does not merely call this an economic violation. It calls it taking a life in pledge. The underlying principle here is profound. The problem is not that the creditor expects his loan to be repaid. The problem is how the creditor is allowed to secure that repayment. By taking the millstone, the lender paralyzes the debtor. He guarantees his own financial security by destroying the poor man's livelihood. The law recognizes a dark truth about human nature. We naturally assume the ancient biblical world operated the same way. When we read through the dense legal codes of the Old Testament, when power and wealth are left unregulated, they will naturally extract everything they can, even if it crushes the vulnerable. God forbids this entirely. A creditor cannot cripple a debtor's ability to work. A lender cannot secure his own wealth by holding a family's daily bread hostage. The millstone must remain in the hands of the poor. We now have an economic system where the lender cannot hold the cloak through the night, and he cannot touch the millstone at all. God has severely restricted what a creditor can take. But this creates a new tension. What happens when the creditor arrives to collect a legally permitted item? If a man is poor and owes a debt, does he forfeit his social standing? Does the rich man have the right to inspect his home? The answer is found a few verses later, where God draws yet another boundary line. Only this time, The boundary is not placed on a physical object. It is drawn geographically, right in the dust of the poor man's doorway. Picture the scene. A wealthy creditor walks through the narrow, dusty streets of an ancient Israelite village. He has made a loan to a desperate neighbor, and today, he has come to collect the collateral. In almost any human society, wealth acts as a universal key. It opens doors. It demands immediate attention. When a rich man arrives to collect a debt from a poor farmer, the assumed social dynamic dictates that the creditor is in absolute control. It is easy to view them as a dusty collection of outdated financial regulations for an agrarian society, perhaps mixed with a few general suggestions. He should be able to walk right in, look around, and seize whatever he deems sufficient to secure his money. In the ancient Near East, debt collectors often employed physical force. They were figures of terror, accustomed to taking exactly what they wanted. But in Deuteronomy chapter 24, God establishes a shocking rule of engagement. The instruction is brief, but it completely inverts the power dynamic of the ancient world. The law commands, when you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. The text draws an invisible, unyielding line across the threshold of the debtor's door. The creditor is strictly forbidden from crossing it. Think about what this does to the psychology of the transaction. If the lender enters the house, he becomes the master of that space. He can use his physical presence to intimidate. He can visually inspect the man's poverty, rummage through his few remaining possessions, and confiscate an item of sentimental value. He can humiliate the father in front of his own children. God says no. You will stand in the dirt of the street. You will wait. The wealthy man is forced to experience a sudden, jarring moment of dependency, to be kind to the poor. But tucked away in the book of Exodus is a law that completely shatters that assumption. He must wait for the poor man to act. By legally restricting the lender to the outside of the dwelling, the law preserves the poor man's agency. The debtor is the one who retreats into the privacy of his home, selects the item to be given, and brings it out to the street. The rich man's power is stopped completely at the doorway. This reveals a profound truth about how God views the vulnerable. In the biblical framework, a financial debt does not cancel a person's basic human rights. Poverty does not erase privacy. The poor man's home remains an inviolable sanctuary. This is not ultimately a story about property rights. It is a story about human dignity. The creditor may hold a legal claim to the debt, but he does not own the debtor. And he certainly does not own the debtor's sacred space. God is meticulously building a fence around the vulnerable, ensuring that economic hardship does not strip away their humanity. We have now seen three distinct boundaries. The cloak must be returned by sunset. The millstone cannot be taken at all. The home cannot be entered. The laws are flawlessly designed to prevent the powerful from using their leverage to crush the weak. But to truly understand why God guarded this transaction with such fierce intensity, we have to look closer at the language itself. The Hebrew text does not just view the collateral as a random physical object.